Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will be getting started momentarily. In the meantime, I appreciate your patience while we allow folks to trickle in from the waiting room. If you have joined for one of these events before, you know the drill. I will continue to chat for about 30 seconds so that you know that you are in the right place before we get started. In the meantime, thank you for being here. Know it's a busy season and we are going to be getting started very shortly. So I'm seeing a good amount of folks coming in from the waiting room. I'm going to give them about 30 more seconds before we go ahead and kick off today. And that's that. Okay, I am seeing 45 after the hour, which means it is our start time. So I am going to go ahead and kick us off. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Brinton Botkin. I use she, her pronouns, and I lead student marketing here at Handshake. I'm so excited to be here with you today because I know it's a busy time of year and launching your early career journey can be quite daunting. So we want to bring folks tools that they need to be successful in a wide variety of career paths. So this fall, we've been bringing in recruiters in different industries and disciplines to answer your questions. Today's panelist is a recruiter from MEDITECH, and I'm super excited to kick off with them in just a moment, but I do want to do some level setting here. I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen so we can all connect directly here. For the next 20 minutes or so, we'll be having a structured conversation, but you can feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to get to as many of those as we can before we wrap up today. As a reminder, you won't be able to see questions submitted by other folks during the session until we mark them as answered live. So please don't think we're ignoring your question. We tend to receive quite a few. So we can't get to all of them, but we will do our best. And anything we don't get to today, we'll use to inform future events like this. And we will also share with AR so that they can have those at their disposal as well for follow-up content. With that, AR, can you go ahead and introduce yourself, please, and maybe give a bit of background on you and what you're working on at MEDITECH today?
Yeah, my name's AR Plano. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a recruiter at MEDITECH. And then I also work on the staff development side, facilitating trainings like psychological safety in the workplace and emotional intelligence in the workplace. I'm also part of MEDITECH's diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives. I serve on several committees, including the leadership board for MEDITECH's Rainbow Pride Workplace Community. And my background's actually in higher education. So I have a master's degree in higher education and student affairs, leadership, and policy from the University of Iowa. Go Hawks! And I worked in higher education for 7 years before pivoting to corporate America. I have used Handshake as a student, as an educator, and now I'm MEDITECH's Handshake expert. So it's great to be here with folks from Handshake today and see how the platform has changed over the years.
Thank you so much for that background. Maybe if anybody else is from the University of Iowa, they can give us a shout in the Q&A. Really excited to have you here, especially given that you have this kind of holistic Handshake experience as, you know, from all three sides of the platform. Okay, before we hop into the meat of today's session, I'd love to do some kind of level setting. And I know that every industry and even individual companies have their own order of operations when it comes to recruiting. So would you mind sharing what that process looks like at MEDITECH?
Yeah, so MEDITECH is an electronic healthcare record vendor. So we develop and supply our software that's used in hospitals, clinics, other facilities on the continuum of care to input and manage private patient data. We hire primarily for non-technical roles and technical roles, and those are our two different interview paths. For non-technical roles, you'll have an initial interview with a recruiter and then a second interview with a hiring group, where as the candidate, you'll give a 10 to 15-minute presentation at the start of that interview. For technical roles, you'll have an interview with a recruiter, a technical assessment that'll place you in a technical position, and then a second interview with the hiring team.
That's helpful. And I imagine we will get some interview-related questions in the Q&A over the course of our session. So we will probably make space for those during the Q&A at the end of our structured convo. But digging into what this session is all about, I would love to talk to you about professional profiles. And by that, for everybody who's joined, I mean your Handshake, your LinkedIn, any other professional platforms where you're really engaging in the recruitment space. AR, do you have any green flags that immediately catch your eye when you're checking out a candidate's profile?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, an updated profile that lists your most recent experiences in reverse chronological order. A nice photo that's not a selfie or a group photo, for example. And then really telling a story. Your professional profiles are not your resume. They can give recruiters or hiring managers insight into who you are. So, for example, in most of my professional profiles, Brenton, I say that I'm a cheese curd connoisseur as a true Wisconsinite.
I love that. And I think that that is the most important information that you can give to somebody truly. But it's a really great thing to note because something that I share with a lot of students as we're engaging is that your Handshake profile is your place to go beyond the bullet points of your resume. Like that is the need to know info, but your profiles are the place to give a little bit of color to who you are and make connections in a deeper way. So I love that you shared that example. And you've talked about some green flags. Are there any red flags or common mistakes that you see folks making when it comes to their professional profiles?
Yeah, I would say there's a couple of things that stand out to me as red flags or maybe hindrances in the job search. The first is having a blank profile with no information. Your online profiles can be your first impression, so you want to spend some time to really showcase who you are. With that being said, once you felt like you've completed your profiles, have a couple people in your network review them because oftentimes there's spelling errors or consistency mistakes. And you're showcasing to potential employers your written communication skills. So there should not be errors.
That's such a great point. And I will say to anybody on the call who is still, in school, still an undergraduate, still has access to a career center, there are really great resources as well for that kind of second pair of eyes to look over your Handshake profile, your other professional profiles, just to get that kind of third party perspective and kind of the gut check on spelling, on the stuff that you're including there. So really, really great tips there, AR. I would love to move into skills. I think skills are such a common theme in questions that I see during these sessions and when I talk to students. A huge part of an effective profile is showcasing your skills, right? So you mentioned that at MEDITECH, there are kind of two paths, the technical and the non-technical roles. Are there any skills that you specifically look for in candidates that you often see overlooked by job seekers when they're building out their professional profiles?
I would say at MEDITECH and overarchingly in any industry, a candidate's ability to effectively communicate is the number one skill a recruiter is going to look for. And that includes both verbal and written communication. So don't forget that emails, text messages, messages on Handshake, phone calls, those all showcase to somebody how you communicate as an employee. So you want to make sure that you're representing yourself in all of those ways and you're responding promptly. Additionally, two other skills I think candidates might often overlook is customer service skills and showcasing emotional intelligence. Research actually shows that 71% of employers are more likely to hire a candidate who has high emotional intelligence than a high IQ. So some of those soft skills might stand out more than you think.
I imagine that we will get some questions. I'm already seeing some trickling in about how to demonstrate those things effectively in your profile. So we'll make space for that after we've finished some of our, initial discussion here. But we tend to get a lot of questions surrounding, particularly from, a lot of the folks on Handshake and who are attending these events are early on in their career path. So we get a lot of questions around not necessarily having applicable work experience or no work experience at all. Perhaps somebody who's worked in a service industry job who wants to get into a company like MEDITECH, or somebody who has not held a job or internship yet at all, who's looking to apply for roles. Do you have any recommendations for how folks can build their profiles effectively before they've developed that professional experience?
I'll start off by saying all job experience is relevant experience. I often find that potential candidates, particularly newer college graduates, leave off roles like serving at a local restaurant or tutoring because they don't see how it aligns exactly with the role that they're looking for. But I can guarantee you that you can market any position you've been in as relevant experience. You've learned crucial skills in navigating a workplace and working with other people in those positions. So you should list them and look at job descriptions and compare them to what you've done. Additionally, if you have no work experience, listing leadership experiences and what you did in those, like student government, volunteering, internships, capstone projects, relevant coursework can assist recruiters and hiring managers in understanding the work you've done, your skills and experiences, and how those will apply to you being a successful employee at their company.
Yes, I love that you mentioned that all work experience is relevant work experience. I often give this example, but my first job, I was a skating car hop at Sonic Drive-In. And not only did I learn to physically like juggle trays while roller skating, but also you learn so much about communication, objection handling, time management. There's so many things that are relevant still to the work that I'm doing today in the tech industry, on paper completely unrelated, but those skills are super important and those come from that initial experience. So thank you for sharing that. Switching it up, I would love to talk a little bit about, what candidates can look for on potential employer profiles. So you mentioned that you are MEDITECH's Handshake expert. And so you are pretty aware of how folks are looking at MEDITECH on Handshake, engaging with you on your professional profiles and your company profiles. Are there any green flags that you think candidates should look for on potential employer profiles, and anything that might indicate a good company fit from the job seeker perspective?
Well, Bridget, you know this, but Handshake's done a lot of research on what college graduates and job seekers are looking for. And based off that research, we know as employers that Gen Z and younger millennials are trying to find culture fit and value alignment. So I recommend with starting at a company's mission and vision, and then their About Me section. And then on MEDITECH's Handshake profile, we highlight current employees that you can connect with, recent articles about the work that we're doing, and upcoming events like we have a Women in STEM career panel coming up and a Veterans career panel. We also have workplace communities at MEDITECH. So they're identity-based and hobby-based. For example, there's an LGBTQ plus group, a BIPOC group, a dogs group, a cooking group, a Star Trek group. The list goes on and on. Companies will highlight how they give back to their employees and their communities, and you should be able to find that in their profiles or on their websites, which should inform you on what organizations resonate with you.
I think that's great. And as a co-lead for an employee community here at Handshake, I'm a co-lead for our mental inclusivity and neurodiversity community. That is something that I particularly, when I'm personally looking at a professional profile, will look out for because it is something that's so important to me about the way that I navigate workspaces. So really appreciate you sharing that. We do have a lot of questions, and I know we're going to make some time for the Q&A, but before we get to that, I have a couple of rapid fire questions for you, AR.
All right.
Professional summary. How do you feel about a professional summary? Yes or no?
No.
No. Objectives. I think objectives are something that's sometimes included on a resume, sometimes included on a profile. How do you feel about objectives?
Maybe on a profile, not on a resume.
Okay. And then should skills be at the top or bottom of your profile?
Hmm. I think it depends on where you're at in your career. For me, top of the profile, but really the side. If you have white space, it could be a place where you fill in that on a resume. Uh, but it depends. And I will say that skills should ultimately be incorporated into the bullet points of how you're summarizing what you've done at a job.
Love that. Okay, I am super excited that it looks like we have about 15 minutes for Q&A, and we've gotten some really strong questions so far. AR, are you ready to dive into the Q&A with me?
I'm ready.
All righty. I am going to start with, okay. Let's see. What are some common mistakes that candidates make on their profiles that could lead to a missed opportunity? I know you touched on this a little bit in the red flag section, but are there any things that you sometimes you see frequently that you're like, oh, I wish this person had thought that through, or I wish this person had done that differently? Could it lead to a missed opportunity?
My biggest red flag really is spelling mistakes and common errors. So I'll say that you really should have a few people look those over. However, something else that stands out to me is also listing dates incorrectly on your resume. So sometimes they'll overlap incorrectly. Sometimes people will put them out of order so they're not reverse chronological, and it's confusing to get an overarching sense of what you've completed as a person in your professional journey.
Thank you for that. Okay, I am scrolling through again. I want to try and get some diversity of questions in here, so I might jump around a little bit. So bear with me. I have a really interesting question here. Is it a disadvantage for a recent college graduate to have some work experience, but no experience in on-campus school activities? Is that something that you're looking for on the recruiter side, is involvement in on-campus activities, or are you really looking more for that relevant work experience?
I don't think that it's a disadvantage for a recent college graduate to have work experience but no on campus. Everybody's approach to college is different. Some people have to work during college. Some people don't have to. As long as you're showcasing skills in general that you've learned, whether it's through a job, an internship, a committee. I worked on campus jobs while I was in college. Some people didn't. So really whatever you can showcase is your advantage.
I love that. And we got quite a few follow-up questions. You talked a little bit earlier about some of those soft skills, demonstrating emotional intelligence and how that can really appeal to employers. This question kind of speaks to that a little bit, but I think we can get more specific later on. Do you have any best practices for making a strong impression during a digital interview? And how can I effectively showcase my skills and experience in a virtual setting? You and I are in a virtual setting right now. You're making a fabulous impression. But do you have any recommendations, particularly maybe for somebody who's not super experienced in interviewing yet, for standing out in that space?
Practice makes progress. Your first interview, you're probably gonna bomb it, and that's okay. So Brinton mentioned earlier, utilize your career services offices. They're gonna have options for mock interviews, so take them up on that. And practice, practice, practice. Look up example questions that come up in interviews for specific jobs that you're applying for. AI is a great tool to use for this right now, too. You can reach out to employers on Handshake. MEDITECH offers coffee chats for folks to touch base, with us as employers on the interview process. And then overarchingly, make sure that you have a nice background, blur your background if you need to, wear professional clothing, test out whatever software they're using. Maybe you're only familiar with Zoom and not Google Meet. If you've never used Google Meet before, you should practice using that beforehand.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And also something I would recommend when you're in the professional world too. There have been a couple of times where I've logged on for a meeting and I realized it's housed on Blue Jeans or some software that I've never
Yes.
used before. And I'm like, what is this? Thank you for that. Okay, we have some questions specifically around MEDITECH and kind of the different paths that you mentioned. We have somebody asking about the technical assessment portion for technical roles at MEDITECH. What does that assessment consist of? Is it the same for all of the technical roles, or does it vary based on specific role and specialty? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so ours is an overarching technical assessment. It's technically a coding challenge. And so we're assessing your ability to code. Ours is also graded by a person at MEDITECH, not a machine. So it takes a little bit longer for results to come in, and it might take a day or two for us to get back to you because of that.
That's helpful. Okay, I want to circle back to the emotional intelligence question that I teed up a little bit earlier. How should candidates display their emotional intelligence skills on an online profile? I know that sometimes in an interview setting, it's a little bit simpler to display that. Do you have any recommendations for the online setting?
In an online setting, displaying emotional intelligence might be a little bit harder than when you get that first virtual conversation, phone call, or in-person interview. However, I think it depends on what experiences you've had. For example, when I was an undergrad, I was an intern at the Gender and Sexuality Resource Center at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. So I listed that as an experience and related some of my points to connecting with students from a marginalized identity on campus. I was a resident assistant, so I listed ways in which I engaged with students who were in crisis. I served on the non-resident tuition appeals board and talked about how that made me understand a broader context for class in my educational experience. So there are certain ways that you can discuss things in your online profiles that allude to emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I think that's really great. Also, it sounds like you've done some really fabulous stuff in your personal background. So thank you for sharing a little bit more. Okay, I want to get into something that in the recruiting world can be a bit spicy.
Hmm.
So if it's not something you can answer, just let me know. But this person says, sorry if this question has already been addressed, but I'm curious your experience with ATS or applicant tracking systems and how they filter candidates on the hiring side. There's a lot of mixed information and it's hard to know what's real or what's not. AR, you
Hmm.
just mentioned that, a real person is looking through those technical assessments for technical roles at MEDITECH. Do you have any kind of thoughts about ATS and, how those play a role in standing out online?
Absolutely. I think that ATS or applicant tracking systems can certainly assist candidates in getting jobs and hinder folks from getting jobs. At MEDITECH, every person who applies to a position, their resume is looked at by a person as well. So a recruiter looks at your profile. You're not filtered out. So I don't have direct experience from the corporate America side on working with an ATS that unfortunately might remove a candidate from the equation. And just from a personal level, I think it's something to keep in mind, especially some of those buzzwords that might take you out of the running or put you in. So make sure that you are adjusting your resume each time you apply to a job so that it has certain words from the job description inside of your profile.
Yeah, I think that's a really strong piece of advice of just like reviewing your resume with a specific role in mind. I will also kind of based on things that I've heard from other recruiters in this series, recommend running your resume through an ATS checker. So there are things online where you can basically check and make sure that your resume format itself lends itself well to potentially companies that use an applicant tracking system to make sure that your formatting is not going to be wonky, accidentally, get you sorted out of the running. So that's just my own personal piece of advice there. Okay, I would love to get into some additional questions here. Clay in our Q&A area is asking, following up on the digital interview advice, do you have any tips for interviews that you have to record when there's no actual interviewer present on the other side? I'm not sure if this is something that you use at MEDITECH, but we've heard from folks about HireVue. Sometimes when you create like a short video about yourself to do that first step in the interview process. Is that something you're familiar with? And if so, would you have any advice for folks as they consider those opportunities?
So we don't do it at MEDITECH. I've done it as an interviewee when I worked in higher education and was applying for positions out of graduate school. And my advice is record those as many times as it'll let you until you really feel like you have a product that works for you. Most often, they're going to prompt you with a question and then give you maybe 3 tries to record. So figure out the question, do your research, and kind of script yourself a little bit. And again, try to be authentic. It's not a reiteration of your resume. You're showing them how you present in your most polished professional way.
Fabulous. And this, I know we talked a little bit, AR, about your transition from the kind of academia space and into the corporate world. We're getting a couple of questions about career transitions.
Mm.
We have Brian asking, can you provide any guidance for people transitioning into a new career path, perhaps from an adjacent role in the same industry sector or breaking into a new sector like service industry into technology? How should that influence the way people approach their professional profiles? Do you have any guidance there?
Yeah, as somebody who's done it, I certainly utilized my network in that transition. I had colleagues and friends who worked in higher education for longer than I did, who transitioned out, that I really relied on. So talk to your mentors, talk to your network, and figure out how to adjust your resume to apply to other industries. For example, my higher education resume looks much different and has different lingo than my HR resume.
Beautiful. Thank you. Okay, we have a lot of questions about resumes. So I'm going to continue on here. We are getting some questions about resume length. Somebody's asking, how long should a resume be, and how important are cover letters in your opinion? So those are two kind of separate questions,
Yeah.
but would love your take on those things.
If you're a new college graduate of a traditional school age, your resume should be 1 page long. And in terms of cover letters, if a cover letter is required, obviously it should be a really polished letter that's specifically tailored to that job, that company, and ideally that hiring manager or recruiter that you've been talking to. If it's not required, don't then submit the general cover letter that says, I'm interested in a position at a corporate company. We want you to want to work for us. So a part of interviewing is kind of catering your interviews to that specific company to highlight how you would benefit them.
I love that. And I'm going to actually add a question of my own.
Mhm.
Talked about kind of catering your interview to a specific company, wanting to tailor your application materials to a specific company. And then you also mentioned that MEDITECH offers coffee chats on Handshake. Do you have any advice for folks who are still in the exploration process, who want to make the most of opportunities like that when it comes to learning about an organization? Any questions potentially that you would encourage folks to ask as they're in that kind of exploratory process?
I appreciate questions that ask folks about their favorite part of working at a company and then what challenges they've faced, because oftentimes folks don't have a candid answer for the challenges part. And it gives me a sense as an interviewee on what I might face working at a company. All companies have pros, all companies have cons. Most companies are not going to be as upfront about their cons. And so making sure that you're asking personalized questions to the folks that you're talking to understand culture fit is what helps me in deciding if I want to work somewhere.
Thank you so much, AR. And I feel like that's a really great note for us to wrap on. This time has really flown, and I want to thank you so, so much for taking the time to share with us today. I'm really excited for the folks on the line to bring even more of these types of events to you in the future. So please be sure to take 30 seconds and fill out the feedback survey that we just shared in the chat. And in the meantime, be sure to check out our events page to see upcoming recruiter workshops and more. Be sure to connect with AR and MEDITECH through those links that we shared in the chat a little bit earlier. And you can check out the recording of this session if you want to make sure that you get to your favorite parts and have your questions answered. We'll be posting that on our blog a little bit later today, and it'll be in your inboxes tomorrow morning. So thank you again for taking the time, and I hope that everybody has a great rest of your week. Thank you so much, AR.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.